Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. If you were going to give permission for someone to have an ego, it might be someone who became director of marketing for American Apparel by age 21, who also happened to have 4 best-selling books by the age of 29. But this would also be the very person who rings the alarm about the destruction an unchecked ego may cause. He's so adamant about avoiding the traps of the ego, he got a permanent reminder of it to see every day. A tattoo on his arm which says, "Ego is the enemy." Someone who has every reason to have an ego and goes to such lengths to avoid falling into its trappings seems like someone worth listening to on the subject. So what is an ego? It's the unhealthy belief in our own importance. It's being so concerned with self-image that it turns into an obsession. It's taking confidence and morphing it into arrogance. Or as Pat Riley simplified, it's the disease of me. The results of an unchecked ego could mean that long-term goals are sabotaged, or the distraction from mastering a craft or achieving your full potential. But how do we keep our egos in check? How can we tell when confidence turns to arrogance or when we are leaning into self-importance? Here are 3 things to look for to see if your ego may be working against you. Number 1, your ego shows up when you aspire to do something great. You may feel tempted to fall into a pattern of seeking constant approval from those around you. Ego will always be there asking what others think of you, and it prefers talking about something over actually doing it. Imagine you set a goal of starting your own business. You set up a social media account and tweet about it. You talk to your friends about it. You even go to entrepreneurial conferences, but you don't actually do anything to move the business forward. Ego spends its time concerning itself with what others think, rather than doing the work. Number 2, your ego shows up when you have achieved a measure of success. Once you do something that manages to impress people, your ego tries to convince you that you have the magic touch, and now everything you do from here on out will also be successful. So instead of staying focused, we get overconfident. This may lead to taking on too many responsibilities or not trying as hard as we should. Imagine that your new business is a great success. After you finally get to work and stop talking about it, you hit the big time. It gets publicly traded and you make millions of dollars. You may be tempted to get into other ventures because you are now overconfident in your abilities. Believing you are invincible and that you will find success in whatever you do will lead to embarrassing, wasteful decisions, no matter how brilliant your original experience was. Don't let success fuel your ego and waste time, talent, and money. Number 3, your ego shows up when you experience a failure or a setback. Inevitably, even for the most successful, you will experience setbacks. Ego is when you would rather save face and dodge responsibility than own up to mistakes and move forward. So let's say you didn't allow initial success to sabotage future efforts, and your still very successful initial business hits a roadblock. Maybe an investor pulls out or a manufacturer shuts down. Ego would have you lose sight of what you were working for by refusing to own up to mistakes that may have led to the setbacks. Perhaps your board of directors asked you to step down to save the company. Would you do it? Or would you allow your ego to dictate your choice, potentially destroying the company you had worked so hard to build? All said, ego prevents you from doing the work and building something you can be proud of. So now we know how to recognize ego and see it for the enemy it is. But how do we defeat it? Ryan calls on Frank Shamrock, the great UFC fighter, to borrow his plus, minus, and equal method. Here's Frank's theory. For each fighter to be great, they need to have someone better to learn from, which is a plus, someone they can teach, which is a minus, and someone they are equal to who they can challenge themselves against, which is an equal. We can use this method to defeat ego. For the first form of ego that shows up when you aspire to do something great, you need an equal to defeat it. This could be in the form of an ambitious person or skilled group, maybe a competitor that is at your level. This will challenge your abilities and force you to grow. When you have an equal, you are so focused on beating them, you can't obsess about what others are thinking. Doing so would waste your time and result in defeat. If you would like to be an excellent golfer, you surround yourself by excellent golfers, practice, and compete against them to improve. For the second form of ego that shows up when you have achieved a measure of success, you need a plus to be defeated. When your ego is busy telling you how great you are, nothing will give you a bigger dose of humility than a defeat. This defeat will remind you to stay focused. It's important to remember that there's always someone or something out there bigger and better than we are. In our example of the golfer, maybe you could find a mentor or instructor better than you to teach you. Their talents and accomplishments may make yours seem smaller in comparison, but it will motivate you to work harder. Remembering how vast the world is and how small you are in the scope of it will provide perspective to keep you from being careless and taking on too much. Third form of ego that shows up when you have failed requires a minus to defeat it. The minus represents you teaching what you have learned. This requires you to look objectively at your failures and lessons learned in order to gather them up and pass them down. The responsibility of teaching others causes you to spend less time complaining and more time looking for ways to improve. For our golfer, he would simply find someone to teach his skills to. Depending on your circumstance, maybe you could be a mentor or write a handbook on what you know. In your particular pursuit of excellence, work hard to actively recognize and sidestep the traps of ego, acknowledging it as your enemy, and use the plus, minus, and equal method to defeat it for good.